Friends, welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie G20 in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you are visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we're going to discuss in today's video is G20. So we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch G20 film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining. So, you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So, let's start the video. G20 is a 2025 American action thriller film directed by Patricia Riggen and written by Caitlin Parrish, Erica Weiss, and Logan and Noah Miller. The film stars Viola Davis as a president who must use her military skills to fight off terrorists who have taken over a G20 conference venue, with Anthony Anderson, Marsai Martin, Ramon Rodriguez, Douglas Hodge, Elizabeth Marvel, Sabrina Impacciatore, Clark Gregg, and Anthony Starr. G20 was released worldwide by Amazon MGM Studios via Prime Video on April 10, 2025. The film received generally mixed reviews from critics. Plot. In Budapest, former Australian Special Forces Corporal Edward Rutledge and his mercenaries try to acquire a $70 million cryptocurrency wallet by chasing a woman down the streets and finally drugging her into a coma in a nearby pub. Meanwhile, U.S. President and Army veteran Danielle Sutton is publicly embarrassed by the rebellious antics of her daughter Serena, who breaks the RFID technology and sneaks out of the White House to go partying, leading Sutton and her husband, First Gentleman Derek, to bring Serena and her brother Demetrius with them to the G20 Summit of World Leaders in South Africa. Arriving for the summit at a heavily fortified hotel in Cape Town, Sutton and Treasury Secretary Joanna Worth present their plan to empower struggling sub-Saharan farmers through access to digital currency. Infiltrating the summit, Rutledge and his men ambush the guest security details, including Sutton's own Secret Service counter-assault team, and seize control of the hotel. As the members of the summit are taken hostage, Sutton and Secret Service agent Manny Ruiz slip away with UK Prime Minister Oliver Everett, head of the International Monetary Fund Elena Romano, and First Lady of South Korea Han Min-seo, while Derek rescues his children and evades capture. Broadcasting his actions to the world, Rutledge accuses Sutton and her fellow leaders of corruption and urges citizens around the globe to place all their money in cryptocurrency outside of governmental control. He uses the hostages' voices and likenesses to create deepfake videos supporting his claims, leaking the doctored footage to the press, and the surge in crypto investment sends the value of his own wallet soaring. On the roof, Serena manages to send a message to Vice President Harold Mosley, but turncoat Secret Service agent Darden captures Derek. Fighting off mercenaries, which include Swidlenders, Sutton, and a wounded Ruiz, guide the others to the Beast, the presidential armored limo. Rutledge executes the Prime Minister of Australia and the President of South Korea, before beating Derek over the radio, forcing Sutton to reveal her location. Darden finds her, but is killed by Ruiz, and Serena and Demetrius are saved by Melekule and Lasidi, South African government agents posing as hotel staff. Han rejoins the hostages and finds her husband's body, while Romano and Everett drive the Beast through the hotel perimeter, and Lasidi destroys the mercenaries' missiles. Everett informs Mosley of Sutton's plan to save the hostages, and Ruiz cuts the hotel's power as Melekule and Lasidi take over the mercenaries' surveillance feed. Killing more of Rutledge's men, Sutton surrenders herself to save her husband and Worth, allowing Rutledge to manipulate her image in a final deepfake that crashes the American economy and gains him $150 billion. Accusing Sutton Samud, who rose to prominence after a heroic photo while serving in Iraq, of profiting off the deaths of his brothers in arms, Rutledge shoots Derek. Stabbed by Han, Rutledge drops the wallet and flees, and a strike team rescues the hostages. Derek is saved by his bulletproof vest, and Sutton realizes Worth is in league with Rutledge, who takes Serena at gunpoint to escape by helicopter. Sutton confronts him with the wallet, the only means of accessing the money, which is knocked into the forest below. Before he can shoot Serena, Sutton tackles Rutledge out of the helicopter to his death, and the strike team pulls the helicopter to safety. In the aftermath, Worth is incarcerated, Ruiz recovers, and President Sutton's plan is successfully adopted by the G20, as she and her family return home to the White House. Cast: Viola Davis as Danielle Sutton, the President of the United States; Anthony Anderson as Derek Sutton, the first gentleman and Danielle's husband; Marsai Martin as Serena Sutton, Danielle and Derek's daughter; Ramon Rodriguez as Manny Ruiz, President Sutton's primary United States Secret Service bodyguard; Anthony Starr as Edward Rutledge, a former Australian Special Forces soldier and PAC security operative; Douglas Hodge as Oliver Everett, the UK Prime Minister; Elizabeth Marvel as Joanna Worth, the US Secretary of the Treasury; Christopher Farrar as Demetrius Sutton, Danielle and Derek's son; Sabrina Impacciatore as Elena Romano, the head of the International Monetary Fund production. It was announced in November 2022 that Viola Davis was set to star in and produce the film, with Patricia Riggen set to direct. Production was impacted in July 2023 as a result of the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike. The film had been granted an interim agreement, though the production was not set to commence filming despite this, and Davis announcing the following day she would not film until the conclusion of the strike. Principal photography officially began in January 2024 in Cape Town, with Anthony Anderson, Marsai Martin, Ramon Rodriguez, Anthony Starr, Douglas Hodge, Elizabeth Marvel, Sabrina Impacciatore, and Clark Gregg among the cast announced to be joining. Filming wrapped by early March. Release: G20 was released in 240 territories globally on Amazon Prime Video on April 10, 2025. Reception: on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 57% of 70 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads, "Too straight-faced to have as much fun with its juicy premise as it could. G20 is more pedestrian than presidential, but does have a commanding lead in Viola Davis." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 53 out of 100 based on 18 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Robert Daniels of RogerEbert.com gave the film 2.5 stars out of 4 and wrote, "Harrison Ford's film succeeded because Ford portrayed himself as a symbol that could be bent or complicated by showing, not telling. This is why a film like Air Force One, admittedly a rah-rah post-Cold War film, has far more to say about America's unconscious vulnerability as a world power than G20 about the war in the Middle East or America as an imperialist force. Still, the film's thunderous intentions don't wholly distract from its more exhilarating sequences. Though the political action thriller G20 began production in January 2024, before Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee for president, it's difficult not to see this film as a commentary on the most recent contentious presidential race. In G20, Viola Davis is President Danielle Sutton, a former Iraq war hero turned politician, seeking a win on the world stage at the G20 summit. Her hopes are dashed when mercenaries led by Corporal Rutledge, Anthony Starr, hijack the event and attempt to take Sutton and her family hostage. Director Patricia Riggen's G20 is the second such movie to be playing this week, and it feels like a modern Harrison Ford film. The Amateur, James Hawes' CIA thriller, starring Rami Malek, is akin to a melancholic take on Philip Noyce's Jack Ryan films. And while many will point to the Has Fallen franchise as the primary inspiration for G20, it feels far more aligned with Air Force One. G20, which lands far better than the snoozy theatrics of The Amateur, may make some question why a prestige actor like Davis would want to lead an action vehicle. But, much like Denzel Washington's The Equalizer, her attempt appears to be in service of a genuine love for the genre, rather than a tacky cash grab. G20 is an entertaining and gripping action vehicle with a deft sense of tension that is sometimes undone by its on-the-nose dialogue. It begins with a forced bait and switch. In Budapest, Hungary, Rutledge pursues a woman carrying a crypto wallet. That action is cross-cut with the Secret Service awakening Sutton to let her know they're pursuing Serena. The implication is that Serena is the woman Rutledge is pursuing, but when Rutledge kills the woman in a crowded bar, taking her crypto wallet, we know that isn't the case. Serena, Marsai Martin, is actually the tech-savvy teenage daughter of Sutton and her husband, Derek, Anthony Anderson. The Secret Service has apprehended her drinking at a bar, an incident that caused her mother headaches in the press as she tries to sell her idea for fixing global hunger by providing poor farmers in Africa with digital currency. To aid the plan, Sutton and her family, which includes her skittish son Demetrius, Christopher Farrar, travel to the G20 summit in Cape Town, South Africa to convince the world to buy in. There, Rutledge, who has infiltrated the security team meant to protect the event, takes the gathered politicians and their spouses hostage in a furious and bloody raid. It's only through the quick thinking of Secret Service agent Manny Ruiz, a scene-stealing Ramon Rodriguez, that Sutton, British Prime Minister Oliver Everett, Douglas Hodge, and a few others momentarily escape. With the help of Ruiz, Sutton works to stop Rutledge and save her family. The major stakes of G20 attempt to play off our contemporary fears: cryptocurrency, deepfake AI, and the shakiness of the global economy. Some of it, like the crypto angle, Rutledge's harebrained scheme involves him trying to collapse multiple currencies by forcing people to panic buy digital currency, thereby enriching himself, is hackneyed. On the other hand, the possible destruction of the global economy is all too relevant in the face of the present trade war. In between these worries, the film contends with misogynoir with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. White colleagues often question Sutton's leadership. Everett, for instance, frequently chastises Sutton for being too aggressive and openly decries needing to follow her. It's also telling that in a movie set in Cape Town, the former epicenter of apartheid, all of the mercenaries are white, while everyone who helps Sutton is a person of color. Part of the reason movies like The Amateur and G20 struggle to deliver the popcorn thrills of 1990s action movies is that they're based around characters that almost feel too specific and pointed. In The Amateur, we're so involved with the protagonist's grief. The actual enjoyment the movie attempts to provide is muted. In G20, the script is so issues-based, thereby providing Davis with plenty of moments to vocally express the politics of the film, that it strangles the film's mood. Harrison Ford's films succeeded because Ford portrayed himself as a symbol that could be bent or complicated by showing, not telling. This is why a film like Air Force One, admittedly a rah-rah post-Cold War film, has far more to say about America's unconscious vulnerability as a world power than G20 about the war in the Middle East or America as an imperialist force. Still, the film's thunderous intentions don't wholly distract from its more exhilarating sequences. As Davis showed in The Woman King, she has the undaunted exterior necessary for action cinema, even if the camera often cuts around her fighting. The sequencing of the set pieces, supported by Joseph Trapanese's brooding score, inspires sharp moments of tension, such as the initial raid on the summit or Sutton's many close escapes. Each member of Sutton's family also does their part, with everyone getting a crowd-pleasing scene. There's also the frigid relationship between Sutton and Serena that warms as the film continues, providing glimmers of heart in a militaristic picture. G20 ends on an extremely obvious metaphor of world leaders needing to come together if the world hopes to prosper, which admittedly has plenty of contemporary resonance. Even so, much like Captain America: Brave New World, which features a raging white president soothed by an appeal to his inherent goodness to cease burning down the country, G20 appears to be in conversation with an alternate universe. It denounces bully politics as untenable, shows us that all of us can find some commonality, and paints a future with a black woman president earning the respect of her peers. If only the last few months showed us that any of that was possible. And yet, by having loud social statements and muddied geopolitics in service of blockbuster entertainment made for streaming, the film will be released on Amazon Prime Video. G20 feels separate from its time, yet painfully indicative of it. G20 Review. When a G20 summit is hijacked by highly trained mercenaries demanding the adoption of a global cryptocurrency, or something like that, it's not entirely clear. The US president risks life and limb to save the hostages and restore global order. Yep, we're deep into fantasy territory with this preposterous dumb as rocks action picture. Redeeming it slightly is the consistently impressive Viola Davis, who takes the role of President Sutton, former Marine, wife, mother, and now leader of the free world, far more seriously than it deserves. As anyone who saw The Woman King will know, Davis has a formidable screen presence and serious action chops. For all its silliness, there's plenty of fun to be had watching her slaughter the bad guys amid a diplomatic hail of bullets and canapes. From The Woman King to Madam President, Viola Davis's growing roster of fierce commander-in-chief roles reveals a star who takes the words leading lady literally, no matter what skepticism audiences may show. The internet seems to have rolled its collective eyes at the idea of Davis in 90s-style action showcase G20, But there's no actor on Earth who could play such a gung-ho US president without some degree of blowback. Since there's no president in US history who'd stand a chance against a G20 summit-disrupting psycho determined to crash the global economy. Supply your own tariff joke here. Clearly reflecting the other candidate in the most recent election, Davis does a fine job of embodying Danielle Sutton, a war hero whose military training and protect the little guy instincts make her an ideal foil for the ruthless Rutledge, Anthony Starr. Rutledge has a plan to turn $70 million in crypto into several hundred times that much by hijacking the Cape Town-based confab and exposing corruption in the world's top currencies, a scheme that relies on forcing all the world leaders in attendance to recite a phrase on camera, so these terrorists can deep-fake compromising footage of them and release it to the media. But Sutton is resourceful enough to sneak away, along with her top bodyguard, Manny Ramon Rodriguez, the British Prime Minister, Douglas Hodge, the South Korean First Lady, Miwa Alana Lee, and the head of the IMF, Sabrina Impacciatore. It's up to these five, plus First Gentleman Derek Sutton, an unusually serious Anthony Anderson, and their teenage kids, Serena, Marsai Martin, and Demetrius, Christopher Farrar, to outsmart and overwhelm dozens of burly mercenary types. From the opening action scene set in Budapest, audiences have reason to fear that filmmaker Patricia Riggen isn't up to the task. She blocks and shoots everything like mediocre TV, with the kind of phony-looking lighting and establishing shots parodied by Team America World Police. Action does not come naturally to the Under the Same Moon director, though the script poses an even bigger problem in G20, a movie whose short title manages to reflect both its high concept and shockingly low intelligence level. Practically all the dialogue is delivered in sentence fragments, maxing out around 6 words per line. Some are as short as 1. It took 4 writers to crack this assignment, and the whole thing still feels like an SNL parody of itself. When one character complains about running around the G20 compound in high heels, Sutton explains that she vetoed that idea and shows off her bright red running shoes, hidden under, but still matching, her long silk gown. As action movie costumes go, it's the most versatile frock since Jamie Lee Curtis's little black dress in True Lies. If only this film were half as funny or bombastic. The script is clearly modeled on movies like Air Force One and White House Down, right down to the trailer capping shot of Davis dangling from a helicopter. Except this president isn't just protecting her own life. While her Veep, Clark Gregg, follows along in horror from afar, Sutton has all of America's allies depending on her, and her Americanness seems to be her greatest asset. In a sense, this patriotic, pro-military fantasy seems to be aimed at those least likely to support a candidate like Sutton, the aggro, might-makes-right crowd that once embraced stars such as Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Though nearly half the movies elapse before the president picks up a weapon, there's no going back once she's armed. Here, Sutton seems to be taking Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Speak softly and carry a big stick, as she machine guns her way through the halls. We should credit Davis for learning how to wield such equipment. Not every new action star takes the trouble. She comes off looking every bit as convincing as one of the Expendables, dropping half a dozen henchmen in quick succession as she pivots in the dark. The movie doesn't need to be realistic or even remotely plausible, since it's dumbing down an already brain-dead genre. Still, it would have been nice if the dialogue were a little more punchy. Get off my plane. Shown to critics on the big screen but produced for Prime Video, the movie isn't mixed for anything better than TV, where cheap effects, like the CG fireball that flips the presidential limo, are to be expected. The action heats up in the last half hour as Rutledge closes in on the first family. It feels like a mistake to have involved Sutton's daughter as much as G20 does, cutting back to tech-savvy Serena's attempts to hack the system, which inevitably introduces a degree of child endangerment, the ingredient that turned Bond into a babysitter in No Time to Die, alongside a few Home Alone-style antics. Riggen surely felt that audiences needed a reason to care about Sutton when it's perfectly clear Davis can do that all by herself. Released just 3 months after the Trump inauguration, the geopolitical action thriller G20 was always going to have unavoidable resonance. While the shoot ended back in March last year, there must have been points during the post-production process when those involved wondered if their film, A rousing story of a black female president taking charge would coincide with a similar, albeit less schlocky, real-world victory. It wasn't to be, and instead the film has landed on Amazon at a far less inspiring time for the US, when a president has decided to destroy rather than save his country. Any links to be made from fiction to fact push Trump's agenda closer to that of the bad guys who aim to tank the global economy and stop a perceived US overspend of foreign aid. While there are moments that might unintentionally insist we make the connection, lead villain expressing glee at a horribly familiar red stock market arrow, G20 isn't trying to be the political film we need right now. Its makers smartly picking brawn over brain. One might be fooled into thinking that might not be the case, however, with a glance toward the film's choice of lead, the EGOT-winning actor, Viola Davis. Since she graduated from bit part player to Oscar winner, Davis has had the odd flirtation with genre, supporting roles in the DC and Hunger Games franchises, but has mostly stuck with drama, a decorated stage actor who gives a stirring monologue like no other. Yet in G20, she's letting her fists do the talking, a fun diversion for an actor who often hasn't had the meaty roles many of us believe she has deserved. This is only her third lead since winning an Oscar for Fences in 2017. She's a smart choice to play Danielle Sutton, a president with military experience, as she has both the commanding regality of a leader — she did, after all, play one in The Woman King — and the imposing physicality of a fighter. She has retained her well-trained physique from that movie. She's forced to rely more on the latter after a G20 summit in South Africa descends into chaos when terrorists take over. She'd hoped to use the conference to help further her noble agenda to help many in the poorer regions of Africa gain better access to digital banking capabilities, but her antagonist, played by The Boys' baddie Anthony Starr, has a different idea. He hopes to stoke fear by hijacking her plan using deepfake tech to convince people across the world that this is in fact a cover for world leaders to gain control over the finances of less capable countries. He hopes to use this distrust to destroy existing currencies and to persuade others to use crypto instead. Very easy to root against a guy who is super into blockchain, which will divert all of the money to him. With her heels replaced by flats and a gun in hand, Sutton is determined to save her family, the economy, and the world. Order to be determined. Contemporary buzzwords aside, G20 works off a blueprint perfected in the 80s and popular in the 90s, a decade that saw its own President v. terrorists actioner in Air Force One. There's nothing quite as sleekly entertaining here, but there are low-grade pleasures to be had in the moment before they're forgotten about soon after. Davis provides Jack Ryan, director Patricia Riggen, with safer hands than we're used to in a streaming mockbuster such as this, although sometimes the film could benefit from more talk and less action. There are moments in the last act where she's allowed to verbally spar with Starr as they bark their agendas at each other that have a crackle that's missing from much of the more mechanical film. It's pacey but also a little rushed, especially in the development of her integral relationship with a rebellious daughter, a payoff that loses some of its power at the end. The script, credited to 4 people including white boy Rick Scribes Logan and Noah Miller, isn't funny or smart enough to elevate this in the way that Davis easily can. And it's hard not to wonder what a sharper writer could have done with this setup. The action is serviceable enough, enjoyment-based, less on deftly staged choreography and more on the catharsis offered to Davis. As president and actor, she has spoken in recent press about the pleasure and freedom the role has provided. The thrill it offers to her doesn't always make its way to us, but there are worse ways to spend a Sunday afternoon. Watching a hyper-competent president save the economy and bring down a tech bro. Plot: terrorists take over the G20 summit with President Sutton, bringing her governing and military experience to defend her family, company, and the world. Review: I've always been a sucker for die-hard clones, and I was especially interested in G20 just to see Anthony Starr on villain duties. Anyone who has seen The Boys knows how well he can play a psychopath, and he doesn't disappoint here. Hilariously, his plan is to crash the world's stock markets to make him and his buddies richer. How ridiculous, as if that would ever happen. Oh, anyway, G20 is like Air Force One in the cheese territory with a few unintentionally funny moments. Viola Davis plays President Danielle Sutton, a former soldier who ends up on the cover of a magazine carrying a rescued girl from the rubble. Pretty much everyone doubts her plans to help people in Africa, so she goes there for the G20 meeting to discuss it with world leaders. Little does she know Rutledge, Starr, and his goons are waiting to take them all hostage. With her military background, Sutton knows how to take care of herself and fights against Rutledge's scheme to save the world. Fair play to Davis, who does her own stunts, and she clearly trained for the role. I liked her character even if the over-sincerity of the script provides a few snickers. It was refreshing to see Anthony Anderson in a more dramatic role, as I've always been used to seeing him in more comedic fare. On the action front, we get a few fight scenes, explosions and shootouts, and things are well-paced for the most part. The idea of deepfakes and cryptocurrencies brings this throwback into the modern age, which gives us something at least a little new considering the rest of the film is rehashed from other, better films. I knew at some point someone was going to reference Black Panther, and the script didn't disappoint there with arguably my favorite line of the movie. I wish there were a few more one-liners, as that's the only line I remember from the film. Overall, G20 is a fun throwback to the die-hard clones of old. It doesn't always work, but Viola Davis makes for an appealing lead with Anthony Starr stealing the show as the villain. The action isn't anything we haven't seen before, but for a streaming movie, this passes the time. In a world where Hollywood is thankfully quicker than reality to conceive women in the highest office, political action thrillers like Prime Video's G20 remind us why these kinds of blockbuster flicks still intrigue us. Following action staples like Air Force One and Olympus Has Fallen that tap into our love of last-minute heroics and sharp one-liners, G20 puts a twist on the genre, casting Academy Award-winning actress Viola Davis as the battle-tested President of the United States who uses not just her wits, but badass combat skills to take on a mercenary siege at a global summit. Though the Patricia Riggen-directed film doesn't always meet the potential of its ambitious premise, it thrives on Davis's immaculate skill at commanding an audience to deliver a popcorn-worthy spectacle that's hard to resist, even when its plot wobbles. At first glance, G20 appears to be just another straightforward political thriller, where heavily armed mercenaries take the world's most powerful leaders hostage during an economic summit in beautiful South Africa. With a mission to manipulate global markets using deepfakes and crypto, G20 is as high-octane and action-packed as you would imagine. Yet beneath the bullets, hand-to-hand combat and quick-witted banter that aligns itself with the humor of Die Hard is a much deeper story. Or at least it tries to be, when it covers the ups and downs of motherhood and the sacrifices that come with being a world leader. With the film attempting to root itself into this relatability, G20 follows President Danielle Sutton, Davis, as she prepares for the titular meeting in Cape Town to unveil her plan for economic stability in the developing world. But like all moms around the world, her biggest struggle is raising her sharp and free-spirited teenage daughter, Serena, Marsai Martin, who outsmarts the Secret Service every chance she gets. Frustrated and concerned about Serena's behavior, she decides to bring her family, including husband Derek, Anthony Anderson, young son Demetrius, Christopher Farrar, and the U.S. Treasury Secretary Elizabeth Marvel, to the summit under tight supervision. But during the opening night, chaos ensues when a G.I. Joe-styled baddie named Rutledge, Anthony Starr, and his group of attackers take the attendees hostage. Recognizing the threat alongside her trusted agent, Manny Ruiz, Ramon Rodriguez, Sutton is determined to fight back and slips away with a motley crew of world leaders. What quickly emerges from the chaos is a hybrid of genres that entails part rescue mission, part family drama, and part geopolitical survival thriller that almost feels like a Disney film on steroids. There's no denying that the concept for G20 has the makings of a high-stakes nail-biter, but the film feels surprisingly safe with its direction from start to finish. For a popcorn flick with an R rating, it's not exactly as gruesome or die-hardy as you'd think either. There are some bold swings thanks to some amazing stunt work and choreographed fight scenes, like Davis beating up bad guys in an elevator. Don't worry, it's not like Captain America. But so much of the movie's action is swift and leans more toward aspirational than brutal. While G20 pays homage to our favorite big-budget action thrillers, the film often lacks the balance it needs with steady writing. This is no way to speak to pacing, which works fine and delivers the promise of action in every scene, but it is a little jarring when only Davis's character feels developed. Despite some funny one-liners and high-concept action sequences that make the film feel theatrical, G20 is largely straightforward. The dialogue is either too clunky or too thin, with key characters beyond Sutton feeling underwritten. Sure, the story is meant to focus on her family, but the film glosses over any opportunities for complexity or political nuance with its international ensemble, including the likes of Sabrina Impacciatore and Douglas Hodge. especially when pitting her against someone like Star. As the film's central villain, he is tragically designed to the point of being a stereotypical bad guy with a great haircut and killer smile. Because of that, it's a disservice to an actor who has played the villain role immaculately in The Boys for nearly 5 seasons. Rutledge's backstory is only assumed through dialogue delivered by Sutton, who has miraculously figured him out thanks to her own military experience. But like the close-knit writing we get between her family and the friendship she has built with Manny, we don't get much more, especially when Star's striking physical presence and capacity for menace could have added more texture to the film's tension. Similarly, Clark Gregg is cast as the vice president, a role brimming with potential, but the film barely gives him more than a few passing moments. For a beloved actor of his caliber and a natural gravitas, it's a baffling oversight that he isn't doing more than reacting from a command center. While the film does away with its old-school terrorism stereotypes that often marginalize one community, G20 manages to fall into a tired trope that undercuts the film's more progressive instincts. Rather than exploring the conflict any further, the film simplifies the dynamic to pure betrayal, which sadly cheapens the conflict and makes the final act feel more formulaic than revelatory. While G20 might be a bit weak in its foundational story, the casting, especially with Davis in full command, does a great deal of heavy lifting. The EGOT winner brings a nuanced weight and credibility to Sutton, grounding even the most improbable moments with magnetic presence. Her no-nonsense intensity, whether as a world leader or parent, gives the film a layer of emotional authority. But the film's biggest highlight is her scenes with Star, who plays the calculating mercenary mastermind. They are among the most electric in the film, which begs the question of why there weren't more one-on-one moments between them. With a chemistry that lends to the film's edge and tone most entertainingly, these two command the screen in a way that feels both unpredictable and earned. That striking energy from Davis is also met with the solid rapport she has on screen with Rodriguez, whose role as a loyal Secret Service agent becomes a subtle but satisfying emotional anchor. It was one of the parts of the film that yours truly really felt invested in. While his screen time is limited compared to the main players, he makes it count with a subtle charm and quiet intensity. There's a sweetness to his protective presence that almost gives off Kevin Costner in The Bodyguard vibes, minus the romance. That said, not every relationship lands in the film. Surprisingly, Anderson brings warmth and levity to his scenes as Sutton's partner, but the chemistry between the two never quite sells the idea that they're a couple, no less one under pressure from terroristic threats. Still, the film gets an emotional boost from his blackish co-star, Martin, who gives a strong performance as the first daughter and plays the angsty teenager all too well with just enough vulnerability and steel to avoid cliché. As a film that delivers thrills and high-octane energy, G20 does it all right, but it doesn't break new ground in terms of storytelling. Instead, Davis and her cast deserve more of a story that balances its delivery of that high-stakes escapism with the intensity that makes political action thrillers such a guilty pleasure. With the film leaning heavily on Davis's star power, watching her command the screen as a fierce, capable POTUS is a reminder of why we love seeing women in roles of power. But women are only as strong as the stories they're given. And in G20, the framework doesn't quite match the strength of its lead, especially in a genre long dominated by men. While G20 doesn't always rise to meet Davis at her level, it's a performance that elevates even the weakest beats, giving audiences a satisfying, if uneven, ride. G20 could give Viola Davis her very own action franchise, and its premise is exactly where Gerard Butler's Has Fallen franchise should have gone. Davis might be one of the most acclaimed actresses of her generation, but she's no stranger to action either. She has previously appeared in the Suicide Squad movies and The Woman King. And the trailer for Amazon's G20 confirms it will be one of her most physical roles yet. She will play the President of the United States in the thriller who takes matters into her own hands when terrorists seize the G20 summit. In short, it looks and feels like an old-fashioned riff on the Die Hard formula. The key difference with G20 is that instead of the hero having to save the president, as a typical action movie would do things, the POTUS has to save the day herself. The film looks more inspired by the Has Fallen movie franchise, merging political thriller and action flick. In fact, it feels like the premise the next Has Fallen sequel should have used. Gerard Butler fronted the first 3 Has Fallen movies as Secret Service agent Mike Banning. The films always involved Banning having to save the POTUS from various assassination attempts, but while a fourth film dubbed Night Has Fallen was announced, it has yet to arrive. Nothing has been revealed about the fourth movie's story either. Though after he spent 3 films saving others, the next logical step was to make Banning the POTUS. This way, Butler's protagonist gets to avert the next crisis and save his own skin simultaneously. Mike moving into the Oval Office isn't that big a stretch in a franchise as ludicrous as the Has Fallen saga. Instead, G20 has seized on that idea, with the entire selling point being about watching a president kick ass. The Has Fallen series wasted an obvious direction to move toward, since the previous entries had pretty much done everything else, and President Banning would have been an intriguing new wrinkle. Still, G20 looks like a fun throwback to the high-concept action films of the 1990s, while Davis is an excellent choice for the lead role. The Has Fallen movies arrived within 3 years of each other, but the fourth film still shows no signs of happening. A key reason the next outing is taking so long involves a $10 million fraud claim Butler filed against Millennium Media, the franchise's producers, via THR. The star claimed he was owed unpaid profits from Olympus Has Fallen. This lawsuit was filed in 2021 and wasn't settled until late 2023. In the meantime, Butler has been working on other projects non-stop, including Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, and the upcoming live-action take on How to Train Your Dragon. Considering the above, it's not a surprise Night Has Fallen has taken a back seat. Butler has been on a run of hits in recent years, including 2023's Plane. So it feels like a safe bet a fourth Has Fallen will happen at some point. It might also be a question of timing, since Butler looks well booked for the next few years, including Den of Thieves 3. It's too early to tell how G20 will fare with audiences when it debuts on Prime Video in April. Still, the movie is a big-budget action-adventure with a name cast, so it should nab a lot of curiosity views. Davis may have landed her own Die Hard-style franchise if it proves a surprise hit. There are plenty of other scenarios Davis's President Sutton could find herself in, though other movies have tried a White House siege a few times. Regardless, an ongoing action series fronted by a performer of Davis's caliber would be a real treat. It's been interesting to note Davis's move toward genre material in recent years, including a possible solo Amanda Waller show. G20's preview makes it clear she's entirely thrown herself into the action sequences, with Sutton taking part in various fistfights and shootouts with the terrorists who take over the summit. Even if it doesn't lead to a Has Fallen style franchise, Davis should still embrace more action roles in the years ahead. If that includes the Amanda Waller show, then all the better. South Korean First Lady Honyo Miwi. Alana Lee wisely sticks close to Sutton, leading the takeover as Anthony Starr here reverting to his anti-Pidian accent as rattled a cookie-cutter baddie seeking to pull off a cryptocurrency coup, since Starr is adept at using Menace Ackland. He can do this kind of thing with his eyes closed. Most importantly, the action is largely well-staged and not up to the exceptional levels of a John Wick, but not cut to ribbons like so many mid-tier action films either. Director Patricia keeps it clear where everyone is and what they're doing. While the fight choreography has just enough oomph, try not to grin when Davis rips off the bottom half of her evening dress. All the better to kick bad guys in the face. It is nonsense and subject to the usual pitfalls of streaming actioners. Every external shot looks green screen to hell. The dialogue feels dumbed down for second screen viewing. You created all of this with your corrupt wars and your profiteering. Goes Rattled's villain monologue, and the plot feels like a topical jumble of buzzwords. Deep fakes Bitcoin. AI grew up in the era of Arnold, Stallone, JCVD, Bruce Willis, and yes, Steven Seagal. Action movies of the 1980s and 1990s had a different flavor than today, but seeing an actor play the President of the United States and kicking terrorists or alien asses was always a fun and exploitative experience. It is impossible to avoid that surge of patriotism, as Harrison Ford said, "Get off my plane," or Bill Pullman declared, "Today, we celebrate our Independence Day." In recent years, a Gerard Butler and Channing Tatum have played agents protecting the president and garnering their own action hero status. Still, it will never replace Bodis wielding a gun or beating the hell out of a bad guy. The Prime Video action flick a G20A is designed with all of the 21st century buzzwords relevant to modern society and technology. but still revels in the formula of a 1990s blockbuster movie. Despite Viola Davis more than earning her spot amongst the kick-ass cinematic presidents, AG-28 is an underwhelming and overly familiar reader of countless generic action movies. Viola Davis plays Danielle Sutton, a war veteran who ran a successful campaign based on her heroic rescue of a child in Fallujah, which became the cover of Time magazine. With a platform designed to end world hunger, Sutton embarks on a trip to South Africa for the G20 summit amongst the most wealthy nations to discuss her platform. Accompanied by her husband, Derek Anthony Anderson, Sutton also brings her children, son Demetrius. Christopher Farah is the quiet good child, while rebellious Serena Markai Martin is pushing back at her overprotective mother. The quartet makes their way to the summit, which is quickly overrun by terrorist Rutledge Anthony Starr, who has a complicated plan to build the world out of their wealth by creating deep fakes of the world leaders. When the attack commences, Sutton and her Secret Service agent Manny Ryone Rodriguez get away with a small group as Sutton plots how to return to her family. In the United States, Vice President Harold Mosley Clark Gregg begins organizing a response to rescue the president. G2A spends almost 40 minutes building towards the attack on the South African summit, leaving over an hour of action. The film spends little time giving us the backstory of any characters other than Sutton or Rutledge. Still, Viola Davis and Anthony Starr share only the last 20 minutes or so on screen together. Early on, we learn that Sutton has a bad knee and does not like wearing fancy dresses or high heels, something she quickly switches out for a sleeveless vest and some big guns. Davis has an enviable physique for a 59-year-old. Hell, she has an enviable physique for any age group, male or female. Boasting a similar presence as Ina the Woman King, Davis delivers in all her action scenes, whether hand-to-hand combat or involving gunplay. Davis makes for an impressive leader like Sutton, and the film avoids any call-outs involving race or gender. Sutton's biggest label is as an American, something that makes the patriotism you feel watching a story like this, but which will likely feel a bit tone-deaf in global markets, considering the recent trade tariffs causing repercussions in the global market. For his part, Anthony Starr embraces an accent that is more in line with his native New Zealand. Starr has made a career out of playing morally ambiguous characters and outright villains. With his slick back hair and constant smile, Rutledge shares much in common with Starr's portrayal of Homelander and all the boys. While this character sounds different and sports a beard, you can still see similarities in the roles as a bad guy with a complicated plan and a grudge against those in power. Starr chews the scenery and looks to be having fun in his role, but he never feels like a threat on par with Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber or Gary Oldman's Ego or Shanov. The closest comparable villain would be Tom Lee Jones as William Cena under Siege A, but Starr does not get to have the same level of wacky fun in his performance here. So much of the movie is focused on Stratton killing Nameless On's enhancement. At the same time, Rutledge waxes philosophical among his hostages that the final act cannot help and feel anticlimactic. Directed by Patricia Riggen, AG-28A is violent and does not avoid dropping a decent amount of profanity, but looks artificial in many other places. A large amount of CGI is used to visualize the hotel where the summit is taking place and sequences set near the White House. Riggen has directed action-oriented projects, including the Antonia Bander film with the 33A and 3 episodes of Prime Vasa Jack Ryan. Both the G20A is her biggest project to date. Riggen handles the action scenes well, but nothing is energetic about them. They are competent, but the lackluster script makes it hard to elevate the rest of the material. Veterana Supergirl writer Caitlin Parrish wrote G2A alongside Eric Weiss, Logan Miller, and Noah Miller, who use group currency and deep fakes as massive technological concepts that immediately feel outdated as part of the core scheme in the film. The fact that the president's daughter is a skilled enough hacker to combat the plans of a cabal of mercenaries is laughable. Still, so much about a G20A is silly, stupid, and ridiculous, including a nonsensical twist in the final act. G20A is not bad enough to warrant any attention towards its budget or how much it cost. Viola Davis is so much better than this material that it feels like a waste to have her presence be as forgettable as it is. AG-28 ultimately suffers from doing nothing distinct from the concept of a president going up against a bunch of bad guys, gun in hand. While we can say that the race and gender element is no longer in question when casting the leader of the free world. That does not give this movie a pass for being a boring waste of talent. More forgettable than bad, AG2A is another in a long line of movies made for streaming that is not worth watching, even if your subscription cost already includes it. This is a movie you can put on in the background and forget about for 30 minutes or more and not miss a beat when you resume paying attention. In a G20 comma, a Viola joins the pantheon of action heroes, tasked with saving the world from a catastrophe. The Oscar-winning actress plays Danielle Sutton, a steely veteran, mother of two, and President of the United States. When we meet the leader of the free world, she's densely battling with her 17-year-old daughter, Serena Marsai Martin, after the angsty teenager snuck out to party at a Georgetown bar. A house Serena managed to outwit her Secret Service agents and end up on the late-night news shows vexes Sutton, who's trying to maintain a flawless and relatively low-key reputation as the first black woman president of the North American nation. In that way, AG20, directed by Patricia Riggen and streaming April 10th on Prime Video, feels like a relic of a timeline in which Vice President Harris' future in the Oval Office seemed all but assured. The film weaves the social and political pressures faced by a black woman ascending to the highest office into a bumpy story about how she's eventually thrust into an explosive global crisis. Riggen, working from a screenplay by Caitlin Parrish, Eric Weiss, Logan Miller, and Noah Miller, struggles to balance the tonal requirements of each thread, which results in a film that's slow to get going. But once the principal heroes and villains have been established, and the perfunctory narrative throughout clearing is out of the way, AG2A finds its groove as a solid popcorn action flick. Ina interviews about the G20. Davis has said she did the movie because she wanted to star in something popular. While this film doesn't shy away from heavy themes, the whole operation hinges on the actress' confident portrayal of the kind of action here usually played by white male movie stars. It's essentially Hera, Air Force One. To be fair, Davis isn't unfamiliar with this genre. She did lead an army of woman warriors in pre-colonial West Africa in Gina Prince by the Woman King. And while one does wish that Davis had a less schmaltzy and more coherent story to work with here, AG28A manages to deliver where it matters. The stunts coordinated by Grant Powell are relatively inventive and appropriately balletic, and the film features a gallery of supporting characters worth rooting for. After a reporter questions Sutton's ability to protect the nation, if she can't even manage her kid, the president decides to take the whole family. AA husband Derek Anthony Anderson, daughter Serena, and son Demetrius Christopher Farah with her to the G20 summit in Cape Town, South Africa. They are accompanied by the president's friend and longtime security detail agent, Manny Ruiz Ramildub, and Rodriguez, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Joanna Worth Elizabeth Marvel. This year's conference is a big deal for Sutton because she needs to recruit other nations to join her efforts to give microloans to farmers in Africa, a step she believes will play a significant role in ending world hunger. There are plenty of doubters, though, including British Prime Minister Oliver Everett, Douglas Hodge, and key players she needs to convince like Elena Romano, the White Lotus season as Sabrinai, the new head of the IMF. The world's most powerful leaders arrive in Cape Town with relatively little fanfare. But that changes later when the heads of state are held hostage in the hotel's conference room by a rogue group led by Rutledge Anthony Starr, a former UA Army officer determined to short the market. They are functionally crypto brothers, AA with a bit of an anarchist spirit, AA who use artificial intelligence and deep fakes to convince workers around the world to back Bitcoin currency. They want the people to rise up against ineffective leadership and recognize that they are being brainwashed into paying for endless wars. Rutledge makes some fair points, but too bad they're tainted by an insatiable greed. During the early moments of mayhem, AA, in which Rutledge and his global team of mercenaries breach the hotel's maximum security system and hack into its surveillance framework, Sutton and Manny manage to escape the conference room. They are followed by Oliver, Elena, and Han Mineo, is seen stealing Miwa Allen Lee, the First Lady of South Korea. Elsewhere in the hotel, Serena, Demetrius, and Derek dodge their armed captors and find a way to escape. AG28 takes place almost exclusively in this hotel, and its events happen over the course of a single night. The tight framing is helpful for a film that can wobble under the demands of its various plot points, some of which end up competing for attention. At first, Sutton's goal is to find a way out of the hotel, but it soon becomes clear that she is the one the mercenaries are after. Her position as U.S. president makes her critical to the plan to crash the global market. And in order to lure her back to the conference room, Rutledge starts killing her colleagues. That plan adds tension to the relatively flimsy stakes of the film, turning a straightforward escape plot into a more gripping game of cat and mouse. Sutton must reverse course and now try to find a way to save her fellow leaders, her family, and the world. After U.S. President and war hero James Marshall proposes a controversial change to foreign policy. He travels from Russia on Air Force One, but the plane is hijacked by terrorists, hoping to leverage the president and a ploy to free a military dictator. Complicating matters, the president's wife and daughter are on the plane with him. With no other options, it's up to President Marshall to outfight the terrorists and save his family and the Rista. After U.S. President and war hero Danielle Sutton proposes a controversial change to foreign policy, she travels to South Africa for the G20 summit. But the summit is hijacked by terrorists hoping to leverage the president in a ploy to crash the global markets. Complicating matters, the president's husband and 2 children are at the summit with her. With no other options, it's up to President Sutton to outfight the terrorists and save her family and the rest of the hostages. There are several moments of bravery and self-sacrifice. Seen at G20 as President Sutton and others put their lives on the line for others. Both the president and her husband, Derek, go to great lengths to protect their children. President Sutton proposes a digital currency solution which will aid poor countries around the world. A mother and daughter who have had a rocky relationship reconcile people's support and encourage one another amid harrowing circumstances. Spiritual elements, the movie opens in a church with a woman kneeling before a collection of votive candles. A man joins her. These feign. Spiritual gestures, however, are simply a cover. The 2 people are not there to pray, but to engage in an illicit trade. Someone is seen wearing priestly garb, sexual romantic content. President Sutton and her husband kiss. A woman laments that Derek doesn't have an older brother who likes divorces. Serena, the president's 17-year-old daughter, is briefly seen in shorts and stockings that show a lot of leg. Another person wears a top that shows her midriff. Violent content. G20A is rated R, and that rating is due chiefly to its violence. Dozens of people, hostages, and terrorists alike are shot, stabbed, strangled, or blown up. Most of that violence is accompanied by the spray or splatter of blood. President Sutton, along with her bodyguard, many kills several terrorists as they try to escape the summit. One mercenary is electrocuted. Another's face gets burned against a hot stovetop. A man tries to kill a woman by choking her. Children are kidnapped and threatened. Someone's ear is cut off and dropped into a champagne glass. An agent dives in front of someone to intercept the bullet. Hostages are threatened. Some are murdered. A man is severely beaten. People brawl, giving and receiving painful-looking punches and kicks. Someone falls to his death. We hear a grim story about a military encounter President Sutton had when she was in the army. At a briefing, the president chokes, "Who wants to kill me today?" Crude or profane language. Jesus' name is abused 7 times. There are 10 misuses of God's name twice paired with the dot. We hear the sword 8 times with 1. Instance of BA dot. There are uses of a AOL bad A and Bard as well. The British profanity bloody is heard a handful of times. Drug alcohol content. Serena, who is underage, sneaks out to a bar early in the film, and we later see a video of her drinking shots. A woman says gin was the reason she was able to raise 4 daughters. People drink champagne at the G20 summit. One world leader suggests waiting until their peers have had a few drinks before trying to convince them of policy changes. Other note for the elements, the terrorists' plan revolves around using deep fakes of world leaders to drive people to invest exclusively in cryptocurrency, which they will then steal via MacGuffin crypto wallet. President Sutton and her daughter have a strained relationship for much of the film. Serena chafes under the restrictions of being the president's daughter. When she complains that she didn't choose this life, her mother bluntly tells her, "You don't get to choose." When she commiserates with her husband after a fight with Serena, he says, "Serena's a teenager. She hates everybody." Someone is informed that a particular world leader doesn't care for strong women. That same leader is dismissive of President Sutton's forceful leadership, telling her nobody likes a bulldozer. For her part, the president has some strong rhetoric, saying that if countries want to remain allies with America, they'll have to fall in line with her policy decisions. Sutton's Treasury Secretary offers to speak to someone, one soulless capitalist to another. Conclusion. Yes, a G20, which takes its name from the annual forum of the world's largest economies, is quite similar in setup and plot as the A-90's Harrison Ford drill Air Force One. An American president must contend with terrorists to save loved ones and stand for freedom. But hey, action movies aren't necessarily known for their creativity. I mean, it could be argued that an Air Force Anya is simply a die-harder on a plane. And there are some positive takeaways for Roma G20. President Sutton is a true hero willing to fight and sacrifice to save lives as a both physically and in the political sphere. The members of the first family love each other, and this shines through all the brighter as their situation grows more dire. In the crucible of a terrorist attack, world leaders stand up against violence and cooperate for everyone's benefit. But like IA Air Force only before it, AG-28 presents a deadly, albeit more cartoony scenario and leans into the resulting carnage. Bloody violence is a frequent companion here. So is harsh language. So, while President Danielle Sutton is a leader worth following, families will have to consider RG2A as a movie worth watching. My background is in international relations, and one of the many facets it explores is the strength and use of international organizations. These tend to be contextually quite dull, from a Hollywood story perspective. But every now and again, my two worlds collide. Sometimes these are pretty fascinating choices, like Ina the Hitman's bodyguard. And other times they can be a confusing mess, like with the rumors. However, today we are upgrading from the IA G78 to Thea G20 and Calamity is afoot. So to set the scene, something is very wrong in Washington, D.C. It is so bad that they must wake Madam President Danielle Sutton Viola Davis in the middle of the night because her daughter Serena Marsai Martin found a new way to get around the Secret Service and escape the White House to go to a party. Now, on her first international trip, President Sutton is on the back foot domestically and internationally as she arrives in Cape Town, South Africa, to sell the G20 on her plan for a digital currency for farmers. The hotel was meant to be a fortress, but a fortress only protects from external threats. One surgical strike later, and the security becomes terrorists, and now 20 world leaders are hostages. AA, narratively speaking, this feels like what I fear for Sonia and a true lie had a baby in South Africa. In many ways, this does feel like a callback to those action films of the 1990s. We get Ratledge, Anthony Starr, our main villain, who pretends to be for the people but is really out for a payday. We get Duplicit as Secret Service agents, a rebellious teenage daughter who will come to respect their parent by the end. The kid who is a tech wizard, people out of their comfort zones discovering their courage and goons. From every persuasion getting taken down in a hail of bullets. There are times when you watch the setup and instantly know where that will play out. It is not the most creative outlet, but then there is also a slight comfort to it in its familiarity. While it is playing in that familiar playset, it also takes the time to modernize things slightly. Danielle Sutton is an Army veteran with a wealth of former experiences that are about to get put to the test, such as Independence Day. She also has a much more sobering history that makes her not only more believable, but also a good counterpoint to Rutledge. On that front, while it is clear that money is the end game, Rutledge is not without raising some good points along the way, and more than just a broken clock is right twice a day kind of way. I also like that while the characters might be inexperienced in this situation, you never felt like they were acting stupidly, just acting from their fear or lack of knowledge. Also, unlike a lot of films in this space, they seem to understand what the G20 is, how it works, and who would be involved. This goes a long way to grounding the film in a way that is missing in such outings like a Captain America, Brave New World. But to be fair, I am not sure if the film showed the best grasp of cryptocurrency, both in how it was going to destroy and or save the world. While you can absolutely create deep fakes using the methods they show here, not in the time frame they use, at least not in a video that would be easily found out, you would expect the more mature journalistic organizations like the BBC to be a bit more skeptical about videos being sent out by a terrorist hostage taker. Oh, and anyone who has ever tried to upload a video to servers like YouTube knows it takes forever. However, while the narrative is all good and dandy, you're mostly here for the action and characters, and here it delivers. Because they are outgunned and in a poor position, Much of the opening moments are all about stealth. Well, right up until the British Prime Minister, Douglas Hodge, gives you away. The best in the film probably are the elevator brawl and the kitchen dissection and all. The stunt players bring the Ray game here. Viola Davis is obviously the right casting choice in a film like this because she brings the gravitas and the grit that you need. Anthony Starr is a fantastic villain and pulls off a perfectly serviceable Brisbane Australian accent. Anthony Anderson Ramey told The Cubed, and Rodriguez and Sabrina Impixiator are great additions, but I will say the low-key MVP of the film might be Mia Lana Lee. In a G20, Viola Davis plays Danielle Sutton, the President of the United States, who plans to provide a viable solution to world hunger at the G20 summit. However, things take a dark turn when mercenaries crash the summit and hold the world leaders as hostages. The crisis becomes personal for President Sutton when her rebellious daughter, Serena Sutton, Marsai Martin, is embroiled in the middle of the conflict. With rising stakes and tense moments keeping the momentum alive, AG-28 has all the recipes for an intense action thriller, and the film almost leverages its entire potential. But it makes up for with the racial screenplay at a film lacks in terms of FA character depth as Samaya, who I see capable of extreme combat skills and boundless love and empathy. Davis Danielle Sutton comes across as both invincible and infallible, the film's attempts to elevate Sutton as an inspiring hero. Lack subtlety, I am not as tall and confident, as you says Elena Romano Sabrina Impixiator, looking at Sutton as she cuts her long blood orange gown and swaps it for a combat-ready outfit. In another instance, a combat officer looks at her in awe while she washes off blood from her hands, unfazed. Throughout the film, Sutton portrays unrestrained heroism and remains distant from the audience despite descriptions of her being a soft-hearted mother under all that armor. However, these issues hardly stop us from enjoying the film as Ida Stiller remains a classic popcorn entertainer with just enough seasoning. AG-20's emotional moments are cleverly woven as conversations between Sutton and her primary Secret Service agent Manny Ruiz, Raoni Rodriguez. Even the banter between unlikely friends turned close confidence. Oliver Everett, Douglas Hodge, Elena Romano, and Han Minuccio, Miwi Alana Lee is enjoyable. We think everything is going in the president's favor. Rutled Anthony Starr unleashes chaos. However, his flimsy motives and flashbacks might have been better left unsaid. Rutledge is a merciless, tech-savvy mercenary who uses deep fakes to take the stock market bull by its horns and crash it. Unfortunately, Starr's performance is wasted in a script that focuses entirely on Davis and her muscle-flexing skills. The high-octane action sequences are both thrilling and realistic. One of the most memorable scenes in the film is when Manny fights a terrorist on a kitchen table while the floor conducts lethal amounts of electricity. For most of the film, Davis kicks, punches, and unleashes a barrage of bullets on Rattle's squad. Sometimes she pauses, witnesses a pile of bodies, and starts having a panic attack, before composing herself to get back up. Again, the film needed more such scenes that humanize its protagonist. While the focus remains entirely on providing one adrenaline-pumping scene after another, the punches land, but the emotions hardly do. From the Woman King to Madame President, Viola Davis' growing roster of fierce commander and chief roles reveals the star who takes the words leading lady literally no matter what skepticism audiences may show. The internet seems to have rolled its collective eyes at the idea of Davis in 90s-style action showcase G20. But there's no actor on Earth who could play such a gung-ho U.S. president without some degree of blowback. A broken bar since there's no president in U.S. history who'd stand a chance against a G20 summit disrupting psycho determined to crash the global economy. Supply your own tariff joke here, clearly reflecting the other candidate in the most recent election. Davis does a fine job of embodying Danielle Sutton, a war hero whose military training and protect the little gay instincts make her an ideal foil for the ruthless Rutled Anthony Starr. Rutledge has a plan to turn $70 million in crypto into several hundred times that much by hijacking the Cape Town-based confab and exposing corruption in the world's top currencies. A scheme that relies on forcing all the world leaders in attendance to recite a phrase on camera so these terrorists can deep fake compromising footage of them and release it to the media. But Sutton is resourceful enough to sneak away along with her top bodyguard, Manny Ram Tildub, and Rodriguez, the British Prime Minister Douglas Hodge. the South Korean First Lady, Miwi Allen Lee, and the head of the IMF, Sabrina. It's up to these 5 A-plus first gentlemen Derek Sutton and unusually serious Anthony Anderson and their teenage kids Serena Marsai, Martin, and Demetrius. Christopher Farah to outsmart and overwhelm dozens of burly mercenary types from the opening action scene set in Budapest. Audiences have reason to fear that filmmaker Patricia Regina isn't up to the task. She blocks and shoots everything like mediocre TV with a kind of phony-looking lighting and establishing shots parodied by Team America World Police action does not come naturally to the Under the Same Moon director. Though the script poses an even bigger problem in G20, a movie whose short title manages to reflect both its high concept and shockingly low intelligence level. Practically all the dialogue is delivered in sentence fragments, maxing out around 6 words per line. Some are as short as 1. It took 4 writers to crack this assignment, and the whole thing still feels like an SNL parody of itself. When one character complains about running around the G20 compound in high heels, Sutton explains that she vetoed that idea and shows off her bright red running shoes, hidden under, but still matching her long silk gown. As action movie costumes go, it's the most versatile frock since Jamie Lee Curtis' little black dress in True Lies. If only this film were half as funny or bombastic. The script is clearly modeled on movies like Air Force One and White House, down to the trailer capping shot of Davis dangling from a helicopter. Except this president isn't just protecting her own life. While her VEP Clark Gregg follows along in horror from afar, Sutton has all of America's allies depending on her. A broken bar and her Americanness seems to be her greatest asset. In a sense, this patriotic pro-military fantasy seems to be aimed at those least likely to support a candidate like Sutton Adro, might crowd that once embraced stars such as Stallone and Schwarzenegger. Though nearly half the movies elapse before the president picks up a weapon, there's no going back once she's armed. Here, Seaton seems to be taking Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Speak softly and carry a big stick as she machine guns her way through the holes. We should credit Davis for learning how to wield such equipment. Not every new action star takes the trouble. She comes off looking every bit as convincing as one of the Expendables, dropping half a dozen henchmen in quick succession as she pivots in the dark. The movie doesn't need to be realistic or even remotely plausible since it's dumbing down an already brain-dead genre. Still, it would have been nice if the dialogue were a little more punchy. Get off my plane. Shown to critics on the big screen but produced for Prime Video, the movie isn't mixed for anything better than TV, where cheap effects like the CG fireball that flips the presidential limo are to be expected. The action heats up in the last half hour as Ratledge closes in on this first family. It feels like a mistake to have involved Sutton's daughter as much as G20 does. Cutting back to tech-savvy Serena's attempts to hack the system A, which inevitably introduces a degree of child endangerment. The ingredient that turned Bond into a babysitter, and No Time to Die alongside a few Home Alone tight Atlantics. Ryan surely felt that audiences needed a reason to care about Sutton when it's perfectly clear Davis can do that all by herself. What drew me to G2A was its premise and cast. Viola Davis is one of the best actresses in Hollywood right now. And after watching of The Woman King, I knew exactly what she could bring to the table as the President of the United States. We have seen plenty of movies where the president has to be saved by someone else, but I often enjoy it when that dynamic is shifted. Davis always brings a serious tone to her characters, and so I was intrigued by how that would clash on screen with Anthony Starr as the film's villain. As a big fan of Fat the Boys, I'm convinced Starr should be in everything and then some. I was excited to see him opposite the powerhouse that is Davis and playing a character that might also be a villain but behaves very differently from Roma, the boy's homelander. Willie G20's casta certainly drew my eye. The movie's premise, with the leaders of the most economically powerful nations being held hostage at their annual G20 summit, was what really sparked my curiosity. I've always enjoyed straightforward action movies, so doing something like that with a fresh dynamic sounded interesting. I was looking forward to what kind of hand-to-hand combat and gunplay a G2A had in store. I'm happy to report that I was entertained by the film's action scenes. While I don't think its script is anything to write home about, the film did a good job of creating opportunities for fights to take place, in unexpected settings and not always with characters who knew their way around a gun. In some ways, I felt some of the action sequences ended up being more unpredictable than a G20's reveals and twists. Thought Davis as President Danielle Sutton and Starr as Ratledge were part of many exciting action sequences that ended with bloody deaths. But when it came to the action beats, my favorite character was Raimi Tildub Dan Rodriguez's Manny Rowe, who was always by his president's side and did not stop helping her even when hurt. To that end, AG-28 did a good job of building the friendships between Danielle and Manny through their action scenes together, playing on their military marine backgrounds as they became closer. While the action sequences are the film's key aspect, there was another element that I felt needed to work better than it did to make you G20. The story centers on how the world's governments should pay for the wars they fight at the expense of citizens, which fuels Ratledge's rage. With the leaders of many of the world's key nations held hostage, AG-28A had the opportunity to present its criticisms of how politicians handle war and the economy better. However, whenever the film tried to do so, it was too by the numbers with no real punch to it. When it comes to the cast, I enjoyed the dynamic of the Sutton family. The complicated relationships between Davis Danielle and her daughter Marsai Martin Serena was set up from the start. The way their bond developed throughout the film felt natural, and I was glad to see where their story ended when all was said and done. Anthony Anderson's Derek was used so that Danielle could be on the field. As long as her husband kept her children safe, the president could get into gritty combat. While Rodriguez's Manny was the most charismatic in the movie, Sabrina Impiator War's Elena Romano also had plenty of charisma to spare. I had wanted to see more of her after The White Lotus's Season 2, and I was not disappointed as the actress brought her characteristic energy to the role and helped add a dose of needed funlaugy 20 with Ratledge. However, the film tried to tell us there was more to the character than the typical bad guy plan of getting rich at the world's expense, but I never felt like his reasons for doing what he did were properly tackled. We needed to have more development, such as flashbacks to his villain origin story. To make us feel for Rutledge and add to the impact of his speeches, still started great with it. The thin material available and Rutledge's presence brought a sense of danger to the film. In the end, though, the movie had some good ideas and even made room for some shocking deaths. But both fake outs it pulled were so obvious that my opinion of FAG2A was taken down a notch. With the film's attempts at social commentary falling flat, AG-28 turns into a paint-by-numbers actioner that is merely serviceable. Plenty of actors can be plugged into the time-honored tradition of knocking off Die Hard, but it takes a particular gravity to be convincing in the subcategory of presidential-themed DIH hard knockoffs popularized by Harrison Ford in Air Force One and franchised by Thea has fallen in movies and TV shows. Like Ford, G20 star Viola Davis is a physically capable actor whose presence is nonetheless more important than her action hero chops. It's not so much that they can both issue convincing B8 downs, though they can, so much as the implicit threat behind the glowering looks. G20 struggles mightily to give Davis a platform for those looks and B-downs. She plays President Danielle Sutton, seemingly still early in her first term and on shaky ground with the sniping. Fulfillment, apparently treating journalists like anything more than gullible antagonists is a fantasy too far for the scripts for credited writers. While attending the G20 Economic Summit in Cape Town, South Africa, she finds herself in the crosshairs of a terrorist named Rutledge Anthony Starr, who takes the world leaders as hostages and uses deep fake videos to crash the world's markets while enriching himself. This isn't one of those movies where the bad guy is meant to be empathetic, but given that President Sutton's big initiative for solving world hunger sounds suspiciously like a crypto scam, maybe Ratledge has a point about not trust especially knowing that her husband Derek Anthony Anderson trying to own rebellious daughter Serena Marsai Martin. Yes, the president has apparently commandeered part of the family from Blackished, and nondescript son Demetrius Christopher Farah are also in danger. She uses her old military training and her close partnership with her loyal Secret Service agent Benny Ram Tildub and Rodriguez to evade capture while punching, kicking, or shooting any terrorists who get in her way. In one of G20's best details, Sutton has already surreptitiously swapped her red heels for red sneakers underneath the elegant matching gown she's wearing, which itself gets to worn and used as a makeshift resource along the way. There's a bald attempt to enshrine these moments as instantly iconic, as if director Patricia is trying to reverse engineer a bunch of "get off my plane." This makes G20 seem painfully self-conscious, yet simultaneously not. Self-aware enough to be genuinely funny. Once every 10 or 15 minutes, it will stumble into a state of dopey throwback bliss. A hulking henchman approaches Davis and menacingly intones, "Let's dance, Madam President," before they fight, or the classic A90s thriller touch of making teenage Serena and Ace Hacker. But these moments fade fast with follow row that rarely matches the campy setup. G20 isn't just another streaming movie that feels designed to be half-watched at times. It only feels half-aid too. Clark Gregg, for example, has a pointless role as Sutton's VPA. Like Anderson, he seems to be there to reassure the audience that men can be good at their jobs too. Back at the White House, Gregg reacts so generically to various developments in Cape Town that it feels like anything could be playing on the screens he's monitoring. All but the least demanding audiences may react the same way to G20 itself. Making a great action movie is, in my opinion, the toughest accomplishment in all of film. A filmmaker has to achieve a perfect balance between the pure entertainment quality of the film in terms of plot, action, choreography, etc., whilst maintaining a powerful emotional undertone that helps viewers stay tethered to a story that for the most part is completely unrealistic. Of films like The Fast and the Furious, Gladiator, and L.A. Tilda, copyright on The Professional are all bona fide classics of the genre because they all center around human connection and transcendent bonds. They also included some of the best action sequences ever and have some of the most entertaining stories in cinema history. Due to the difficulty of obtaining this balance, most action films rely heavily on the action. While they fulfill the need for entertainment, they tend to lack the emotional depth that keeps viewers connected. But every now and then, a film like G20 will come out and surprise me because somehow it is so bad that it miraculously fails at providing both entertainment and emotion. A G20 tells the story of the G20 summit in South Africa, which is thrown into chaos after a militant organization seizes control of the event and takes multiple major world leaders as hostages. However, the President of the United States, Viola Davis, who has extensive military experience, evades capture and starts carrying out a plan to make it out and get help. As the film progresses, the militant organization reveals that their plan is to make deep fakes of the various leaders and publicly release manufactured footage of conversations about the global plan to control citizens through currency. The head of this organization, Rutland Anthony Starr, aims to convince the global population through these deep fakes to pull their money out of the markets and invest it in cryptocurrency. So his Bitcoin position skyrockets. Yeah, you read it right. And the global working class exits the clutches of the elite, taking back control through digital currency. I think the most important things to discuss here are the words deep fake, crypto, and Bitcoin. Every time any of these words were used in the movie way too many times to count, I actually wanted to gouge my eyes out because of how much secondhand embarrassment I was experiencing. G20. Viola Davis stars as President Danielle Sutton, a military hero who rode a wave of patriotic pride at the Gudula independence. Die a kind, not the January 6th kind, all the way to the White House. Her biggest scandal is that she's having trouble reining in her rebellious teenage daughter, Serena Marsai Martin. And things on the national home front are apparently calm enough that her primary agenda for the upcoming G20 summit is getting other world leaders to sign on to her ambitious new plan to use digital currency and online banking to help struggling farmers in Africa. I would try to explain this plan better, but the more details I give, the more confusing it would be. This is not the kind of movie built to be judged or discussed on the level of plot or theme or artistic choices. No diving in the shallow, and we would only hurt ourselves. In any case, not too long after Sutton arrives in Cape Town, South Africa, the top-of-the-line hotel hosting the G20 summit is subject to a hostile takeover masterminded by a mercenary-turned-crypto terrorist named Rutland Anthony Starr, aka Homelander. He's going to hold all the world leaders hostage until the citizens of the world follow his instructions and take their savings out of all traditional banking institutions and invest everything in crypto. It's up to Sutton and her main SSD detail, Manny Rowe Ram, Tildub, and Rodriguez, to fight their way out and stop him before the entire global economy is destabilized. High and deep fakes are thrown into the mix as well because this is a film that's trying really hard to be timely. Always losing proposition in the movie business, where a quick turnaround is a couple of years while pop culture and news cycles move along in mere weeks. Buddha G2A is a rare example where the result of this losing battle is not merely a film that feels dated, but one that feels like it was genuinely made for an alternate universe. G20A was greenlit for calm of Harris's America to a degree that is by turns fascinating, unintentionally hilarious, and downright depressing. It's a failed bet on not just come of his victory, but the assumption that she would be ushering in as far as pop culture is concerned. The Obama years 2.0, those happy days when Olympus has fallen a rake in so much money, Hollywood decided it was worth expanding into a whole franchise. There are winks and nods about women in power and progress, and a cringe-worthy joke about Wakanda. Sudden is come of a by way of Nick Fury, just in case there might be any room for doubt. Clark Gregg plays VP Harold Mosley, and she has a Hillary Clinton-coded best friend Nami and Treasury Secretary Joanna Worth Elizabeth Marvel to drive home the point. This is a movie that tried to anticipate the future. And it is very clear that nobody involved anticipated a world where Rutledge's convoluted crypto conspiracy somehow makes more sense than the actual forces threatening to destabilize the global economy, which is at once tragic and hysterical. How is reality dumber than this dumb movie? Long story short, I saw G2A good. Not really. Is it fun? Kind of, sort of, sometimes in a plain movie. No thoughts, head empty, smooth brainway. It would certainly be more fun if it were the 90-minute movie it clearly wants to be instead of running closer to 2 hours. But what is most compelling about the G20A by far is Viola Davis as actioned hero. We've seen her kick butt and take names before, but at this point, after Film Sedosa and The Woman King, it's really starting to feel less like a phase and more like a way of life. And honestly, I'm seated. Butler and Nissan and Stefan deserve a little healthy competition. Terrorists take over the G20 summit with President Sutton bringing her governing and military experience to defend her family, company, and the world. Viola Davis plays an American president worth rooting for in G20, which is a nice change of pace from what Americans are currently experiencing in the real world. Surrounding Davis' committed performance is generic and forgettable. But AG-28 lacks the fun of president versus terrorist films like IA Air Force, Anya 1997, and Olympus Has Fina 2013. Davis stars as President Danielle Sutton, who travels to the G20 summit in South Africa with her husband, Derek Anthony Anderson, and young children. A terrorist, named Rutledge Anthony Starr, takes over the forum and holds the world leaders hostage. He wants them to feed their people lies on television, while he razz in money on a cryptocurrency wallet. Sutton must use her skills from her military background in order to stop Rutledge and save the world. Patricia Ryan directs G20 without any distinct style, and cinematographer Czech Varies gives the film a TV-quality look, resulting in a serviceable but bland action thriller. The set pieces are energetic enough with elevator fights and car explosions, but the film only really embraces its absurdity in the third act. Until then, it plays out too seriously given the silly premise at the center. Though she deserves better material, it is fun to see Davis in action Modena G20. The Oscar-winning actress is better known for her performances in dramas like Aya Francesa 2016 and Amarini's Black Bottom 2020. But she has been embracing action lately with films like He the Woman King 2022-59. Davis looks fit and tough as she takes down bad guys with the help of a stunt performer too. I'm sure Star also seems to be having a good time playing the antagonist. With his slick hair and large grin, he always brings a charismatic presence to his evil characters. While Rutledge is no Homelander, Starr still gives him weight and personality where a lesser actor would have made him a cardboard villain. Despite the strong performances by Davis and Starr, AG-2A is a streaming film and worthy of their talents. A president versus terrorists film full of action should be really entertaining. But the G2A is dull and familiar at most turns. We're a long way away from Harrison Ford throwing bad guys out of planes. Los Angeles, April 9th, UPI AG-20 on Prime Video Thursday is a fun and silly throwback to Die Hard and other action movies of its like, with so many classics in the genre already. Nostalgic carried G2A through its familiar beats. Viola. Davis stars as Danielle Sutton, a U.S. president presenting a plan to combat world hunger at a G20 summit. The gathering is interrupted by a terrorist takeover led by Eddie Ratledge, Anthony Starr. But President Sutton escapes with her Secret Service agent Manny Ramon, Rodriguez, British Prime Minister Everett, Douglas Hodge, and 2 Asian dignitaries. Sutton being a woman and the lone hero against the gang of terrorists is a progressive step. 37 years after Die Hard, the male presidents in previous film saw Air Force One, White House down. An independent style also took action against invading forces, human or otherwise. G20A is a bit more of a group effort as Sutton's leadership empowers other hostages. Giving her some good presidential catchphrases, she has a strong partnership with Manny, who was shown training her in martial arts earlier in the film. This along with her past service in the Iraq War, establishes her physical capabilities since the G20 summit is being held at a hotel. The action hits many of the beats a Die Hard established in its office building setting. Sutton at one point climbs into an elevator shaft, and the climax also involves a helicopter. These set pieces are well crafted. In particular, a kitchen fight building up to an overflowing sink and fray wire paying off in a satisfying way. The action is filmed with somewhat shaky handheld cameras, but not egregiously, so like the Aboria movies. Prime Minister Everett is the coward who complains the whole time and even dismisses Danielle's war heroics. Unlike the corresponding and Die Hard character, the coy Harry Ellis, Everett eventually finds inspiration in Sutton's leadership. The villains lack the imagination of more memorable action movie bad guys, as they are just generic terrorists extorting world governments for financial gain. Their plan uses eye to deep fake statements from the hostages, but fails to imagine fears that haven't previously been expressed. Rutledge's plan also involves inflating the value of Bitcoin against the failing US dollar to get rich. The idea is as preposterous as navigating the actual cryptocurrency market sounds. The politics of the film are not much dapper. Rutledge is a military veteran bitter over the battles at Fallujah during the Iraq War. Sutton also proposes giving world farmers Bitcoin to buy seeds, drawing criticism from political opponents who argue she is putting African farmers over Americans. Though it's hard to argue, real-life politics aren't just as one-dimensional. In another parallel to Die Hard, Sutton's spouse is one of the hostages, First Gentleman Derek Sutton, Anthony Anderson. The couple also have kids, and it is established their teenage daughter, Serena Markai Martin, is adept at evading Secret Service and their security systems. Serena ultimately puts her tech skills to use for her mother, and helps heal their family tensions too. The age of films doing Die Hard and Underscore largely ended in the 90s, with a few exceptions this century. It is a thrilling formula that deserves to come back, and setting it amongst world leaders is a fun twist. Fred Topple, who attended film school at Ithaca College, is a UPI entertainment writer based in Los Angeles. He has been a professional film critic since 1999, a Rotten Tomatoes critic of the Television Critics Association since 2012, and the Critics' Choice Association since 2001-23. Read more of his work in entertainment. It's tempting to assume that movie stars sign up to do Formula X streaming service flicks because they're attached to a hefty paycheck. That must be a major factor. But sometimes there's something more going on. From a certain perspective, these junky, disposable action films are almost like a fantasy camp away for a respected big-name actress to headline the sort of project traditional Hollywood studios rarely allow her to pursue. If you've won an Oscar and made your name as one of the best of your generation, what's the harm in having a little dumb fun while getting paid for it? Who can say if such logic explains why Viola Davis appears in Amazon MGM Studios at G20, a DIH Hardian action thriller that will be playing exclusively on Prime Video. Granted, the woman who took home the Best Supporting Actress prize for A Princess is a producer on this easily resistible piece of anonymous content, and she's hardly new to this genre. But where her previous action outings, and namely A Widowa and The Woman King, were far more distinguished. AG-28 aims for the predictable from the outset and never surprises after that. At least the movie tries to have a bit of a sense of humor about itself along the way. Directed by Patricia, Riggen, who previously helmed the chill and mining disaster film with the 33,AG2A, lays out its characters and premise smoothly enough. Davis is Danielle, the American president who won election by being a war hero in Iraq. Even though that doesn't make it any easier to be mom at home in the Oval Office, where she's raising a rebellious teenage daughter, Serena Markai Martin, and precocious son Demetrius Christopher Farah. After Serena goes viral for partying underage at a bar, Danielle decides she needs to keep a closer eye on her kids, bringing them in support of husband Derek Anthony Anderson with her on a trip to the all-important G20 summit in Cape Town, South Africa, to warn between family and duty. Danielle hopes this annual meeting of the planet's wealthiest nations can lead to productive change, not just empty promises. But her optimism is quickly dashed once a terrorist organization led by Rutledge, Anthony's star, invades the summit, part of his not particularly interesting plan to short global currencies so that his investments in cryptocurrency will spike. Most everyone is taken hostage or killed, but Danielle escapes along with her personal Secret Service agent Manny, Ram Tildub, and Rodriguez, and a couple other world dignitaries running around this lavish hotel with Rutledge's men in close pursuit. Danielle will have to draw from her military training in order to rescue her family and save the day. G20A is the sort of autopilot streaming movie whose big twist you can comfortably guess within about 10 minutes. The reliable flimsiness of these algorithm-driven flicks can be a bomb for audiences who demand something undemanding, a reasonable facsimile of the type of film they enjoy. But without ever stooping to self-parody, AG28 does occasionally attempt to goof on its own glitch, a copyright S, one of Danielle's fellow escape. The wimpy, whiny British Prime Minister Douglas Hodge serves as convenient comic relief, alongside Sabrina towards no-nonsense head of the International Monetary Fund, who quickly has her full of this trip. This oddball collection of world leaders with their mismatched personalities is never particularly funny. But that doesn't stop Ryan from trying her best to juice the stale proceedings with quips and amused reaction shots. At the same time, Davis wants us to invest in her character's emotional plight. As much as the president fears that her daughter hates her, deep down, we know they love wine and ultra, and that Danielle's quest to protect her children will double as confirmation that she is, in fact, a good mother. But the stabs at being heartfelt are as colorless as the script scraps of societal commentary. Vague observations about sexism and racism in American politics are brought up as rote talking points, and the fear of a post-truth world in which deep fake technology can destroy global stability is utilized in the least compelling way imaginable. But IFG28 barely registers as original. Its star remains commanding. Even when Davis dutifully goes through the motions as stern government official Amanda Waller in the recent DC films, she seems incapable of phoning in a role or winking to the audience. Davis exudes authenticity, a ferocious toughness, without ever seeming superhuman in G2A. She's the only real thing in a movie that's hopelessly phony. From its cheap special effects to its cardboard villain, the film is thoroughly cut rate except for Davis, who shoots, punches, snarls, and emotes with the grandeur and cool you'd expect from a fictional American president. The film is stocked with television actors you probably enjoy more in their other work. Rodriguez's cutie pie handsomeness has made him beloved, and I will trend. And he pops here as well, playing a Secret Service agent who might be the one person who can be direct with Danielle. The two actors have such a warm, tender rapport, or that you may be forgiven for wondering why the president doesn't dump her nice guy lump of a husband for this hunk star best known now from his Prime Video. The Boys has exactly the same maniac madman stick as every other movie terrorist. Naturally, Rutledge insists he's not a terrorist, but rather a tragic product of the greed and callousness of the world's most powerful countries. Even a G20 subversive political commentary comes from other better films. Is there value in trash like a G20? Everyone involved gets to play pretend, acting as if they're in a real action blockbuster rather than the slimp simulation. Although, if you're hungry to see Davis in this vein, a Widowa and the Woman King are there waiting for you. Rest assured, Danielle will save the world, but more. Importantly, Davis escapes with her dignity intact. Even in product this threadbare, she knows how to hold her attention, practically willing a G28 to rise to her level. Davis may be a miracle worker, but even she can't pull off that feat. In the immortal words of Oscar the Grouch from A Sesame Street, I occasionally love trash. I don't love all trash because even a grouch has to be picky sometimes, which means I am incapable of watching something like He Married at First Sight without whacking myself in the face with a hammer. But when it comes to movies, especially towards the end of the week, And especially when I've been drinking, which only happens at the end of the week, I don't always feel like A3A1 half epic about a Hungarian survivor of the Holocaust trying to build buildings in America and dodge the rapist. Tendencies of a Billy Century factory who finds relief in pricking herself with needles as an important and entirely valid commentary on social inequity and the benefits and drawbacks of alternative medicines. Sometimes I just want to watch Viola Davis people up. Sure, there's plenty of movies available where people come to a violent end at the hands of a righteous avenger. But then I heard that a new flick was coming out with Davis as the lead playing an American president, pretty much in a die-hard scenario, saving the day, making quips, giving the baddies what for on that count on paper. I cannot say that this flick doesn't deliver on exactly those counts. Viola Davis does play the American president at the annual G20 conference, where all the biggest and hottest economies getting together to figure out how they're going to over the rest of the world. This time, in Cape Town, South Africa, she was formerly in the army, so her ability and willingness to kill people is backed up by story detail. It is also, since she's referred to as a war hero, her ticket to political success in an America that this film imagines isn't dominated by racist and sexist morons who would rather vote for an adjudicated rapist and 36-count felon whose every business has failed except for the one popping up white supremacy. In other words, this fantasy realm is nothing like our actual world. She has 2 annoying kids and a husband with a beard so pointy that we never confuse him with some beta handbag carrying was. Nah, he's a man. President Davis makes a speech saying the countries in the G20 are going to figure out a way to end global hunger, which is another example of how this is really a fantasy film and not based on this, our plane of existence. The other members of the G20 are reluctant to get on board, but that's only because they have no idea what's about to happen to them. And I'm guessing ex-ass Australian guy called Rutland, Anthony Starr, leads a bunch of mercenaries, hooted of all those countries, including, I might add, the Prime Minister of Australia. Sure, the presidents of Russia and China are there, but they have a natural guy who's meant to be the head honcho for our home that is G by C. The actor, who I don't think gets a single line of dialogue before he's unceremoniously murdered, is called colon loss. This will mean nothing to anyone outside of maybe 4 people, but he looks like the spitting image of Chris Minns, the current photogenic premier of New South Wales. But I can say unequivocally that he looks 4,000 times more attractive than any male prime minister this racist country has ever had. I mean, Albo has his charms, but Morrison Abbott, Rod, Howard, and his Menzies-like eyebrows. Fraser Menzies and his terrifying Howard-like eyebrows. These men's faces have done more to convince Australian women to be gay than all of the Bunningses and flat-soled comfortable shoes in all of Christendom. I guess it doesn't matter. His very attractive head attracts a bullet from the main nasty chap's gun in short order. And then he's not there for us to leer at anymore. As far as bad guys go, Anthony Starr, who's actually a Kiwi, has played some nasty ones. Probably best known for playing the sociopathic hero Homeland Arena. The boys convincingly and dazzlingly plays a less psycho mercenary type here. But really, let's be honest. He really is a stand-in for being that most terrible of things that exists in the so-called real world. No, not a terrorist or a vegan, but a crypto bro. The entire scheme of taking all the leaders captive is for the purpose of influencing millions of people to take their money out of banks in order to buy cryptocurrencies. I mean, morons are already doing that today without a single shootout or hostage, but he wants to accelerate the process and destroy the world order at the same time, leaving him as, I don't know, a somewhat more competent Elmo Husk. I admit it's a dumb plan. So, dumb, but these kinds of things don't matter. We understand the setup. Hero Under Siege sneaks around against many enemies, offering them in drips and drabs, occasionally bumps into the hot. Alan Rickman-like leader until finally making sure they bite the big one in a very brutal and/or cinematic fashion. The only question is whether we buy Viola Davis as a John M. Land type. The thing is, I guess we don't really have a choice. She is so forceful. She demands that we take her seriously, even and especially when everything around her seems so flimsy. I could have done without the stuff with her family. She thinks her teenage daughter hates her because of the constricted life she's meant to live as a result of being a president's daughter. Madam President, I can assure you that she hates you because she's your teenage daughter. And because this is the bland kind of film that you're in, she'll come good, help you in crucial moments, and then tell you she loves you before the movie ends. The action of Broken Bar is not so great in this flick. There are some decent enough brawls, a few one-on-one fights with some guys in combat gear where it goes, okay, and one sequence of what I'm going to call lazy John Wick type. But it's okay. Davis acquitted herself superbly in a very violent film a couple of years ago called it The Woman King, where she killed so many people with swords in her bare hands. And sometimes just with a mean glare, but here it's not really on the same level, though. Of course, it's a different context. This plays out exactly as you would expect a flick like this to play out, with almost nil surprises, but it's enjoyable nonetheless. It's not a problem specifically, but for much of the flick, the president is saddled with the British Prime Minister, who's a sniveling weasel until he isn't. The South Korean Prime Minister's wife and the woman who is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, who's great. I think I recognized her from the second season of White Lotus. Sabrina War is her name, and has all the ovaries the British PM lacks. They all get their moments, but what it doesn't foster is the feeling we had in the best flicks in this genre. The die-hard genre. A die-harder in a building. A die-harder on a plane, on a train, on a boat, on a space station, in the White House. A die-hard with a president on the president's plane. So many more of the hero alone with some allies far away, battling against a group of cool killers who completely underestimate the hero until he or she kills them dead. Here, there are so many obstacles of hangers-on and family thrown in her way that it all ends up looking like excuses for delaying the inevitable, which I guess all films have. But it really feels like they want it to be neither too much dram. And they compensate by having Davis yell at people in a focused manner that could drill through concrete. She is still pretty great, but this feels a bit like a victory lap. Like, yes, she deserves her flowers, but not necessarily for this flick. She has also clearly been working on those arms because, yay gods, I was having some flashbacks to Linda Hamilton, Sir Connor Terminator 2, which is the pinnacle of arms, or at least non-steroid abuse arms. Her arms are great. She is great, but the film is middling both in concept and in delivery. But that's okay. For a Friday night watch after a few ciders, well, I was in the right frame of mind for this flick. And I loved when the two South African Secret Services officers made their presence known and committed some acts of Bodhisattva, prompting the president's other kid to yell from Wakanda, which made me laugh. I do have to say as well, or at least I want to that film titles are either getting more prosaic or dumber. Take your pick. Maybe the algorithm is selecting these titles. Maybe executives are getting more cowardly, but titles used to have a tiny bit of abstraction to them. Like they weren't always solely about the thing they were about. Even the Namia Diard was a reference to what a badass the main character is. Note about the predicament he found himself in which not what this film is about. Not a second is spent adjudicating whether the G20 is a force for good, evil, or mediocrity in the world. Thanks for watching.